Racist chef refuses to cook for black diner, then finds out she's a food critic. How will this story escalate? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. Maya walked into the restaurant with a confident stride, her head held high as her eyes scanned the room. It was one of the most talked about fine dining establishments in the city, La Belle Maison, known for its exquisite French cuisine and its notoriously temperamental chef, Pierre Lambert. Maya had done her research. The chef had a reputation for brilliance in the kitchen, but also for his arrogance and quick temper. What she hadn't anticipated were the whispers and subtle glances from the staff as she was escorted to her table. Dressed in an elegant blouse and slacks, Maya exuded grace and professionalism. She was here on assignment, but no one in the room knew that. As one of the city's most influential food critics, Maya's reviews were known for their fairness and depth. She had helped launch careers and, in some cases, ended them. Today's visit was part of her usual routine. Undercover, discreet, and focused on capturing the full dining experience. She didn't expect special treatment, only professionalism. As she settled into her chair, the maitre d' approached her with a menu. "Welcome to La Belle Maison, madam," he said with a tight smile, though his tone carried an edge of discomfort. Maya nodded politely and opened the menu, scanning the carefully curated options. The dishes sounded delightful, each description a testament to the artistry of the chef. She ordered the chef's tasting menu, eager to experience the full range of Pierre's expertise. The maitre d' hesitated for a moment, then cleared his throat. "I will inform the chef of your selection." Maya noticed the slight shift in his demeanor as he walked away. She wasn't sure what to make of it, but she decided to brush it off. This wasn't the first time she had sensed unease in a high-end establishment. Her years in the industry had taught her that some restaurants were more welcoming than others, and she had learned to focus on the food rather than the atmosphere. Behind the swinging kitchen doors, Chef Pierre Lambert was in his element, or so it seemed. He moved with precision, barking orders at his staff as they scrambled to keep up. The kitchen was a symphony of sounds. The sizzle of pans, the clatter of knives against cutting boards, the hum of conversation between line cooks. Pierre thrived in this chaos, his passion for perfection driving every dish that left the kitchen. The maitre d' approached cautiously, knowing better than to interrupt Pierre when he was in the middle of plating. "Chef, table 5 has requested the tasting menu," he said, his voice steady but respectful. Pierre didn't look up. "And that's what we do here. It's the guest at table 5, the maitre d' continued, lowering his voice. "She's different." Pierre's brow furrowed, and he finally glanced up. "What do you mean, different?" The maitre d' hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "She's a black woman. She doesn't seem like our usual clientele." Pierre's expression darkened, and he set down the plate he was holding. "Are you telling me we have someone in my restaurant who doesn't belong here?" The maitre d' shifted uncomfortably. "I just thought you should know," Pierre sneered, wiping his hands on a towel. "We'll see about that." Maya waited patiently, sipping her water as she observed the flow of the restaurant. The servers moved efficiently, their faces carefully neutral, though she couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. When the maitre d' returned to her table, his demeanor had changed. He was polite, but there was a stiffness to his smile that hadn't been there before. "I regret to inform you," he said, his tone overly formal, "that the chef is unable to accommodate the tasting menu request this evening. Perhaps you'd like to choose something else." Maya raised an eyebrow. This was unusual. In her experience, a tasting menu was always available at an establishment of this caliber. "Is there a reason why?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. The maitre d' hesitated. "The kitchen is quite busy tonight." Maya's sharp instincts kicked in. She could tell this wasn't the full story, but she decided to play along. "All right," she said, scanning the menu again. "I'll have the duck confit and the heirloom tomato salad." The maitre d' nodded and left, but Maya couldn't shake the feeling that her presence was unwelcome. She had encountered subtle biases before, but this felt more overt. Still, She remained composed, determined to see the evening through. In the kitchen, Pierre was fuming. "I don't care what she orders," he snapped at one of his sous chefs. "Make it mediocre. I won't have my reputation tarnished by serving someone who doesn't appreciate what we do here." The sous chef hesitated, looking uncomfortable. "Chef, she's a paying customer. Shouldn't we?" Pierre cut him off with a glare. "I don't need a lecture from you. Just do as I say." The atmosphere in the kitchen grew tense. Some of the staff exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared to challenge Pierre. His reputation for brilliance in the culinary world was matched only by his temper, and they knew better than to cross him. When Maya's dishes arrived, she immediately noticed the lack of care in their presentation. The tomato salad looked hastily assembled, and the duck confit lacked the crisp, golden skin that was its hallmark. She took a bite of each, her expression neutral, but inside, she felt a mix of disappointment and anger. Maya had encountered subpar food before, but this felt deliberate. It wasn't just the quality of the dishes, it was the dismissive attitude of the staff, the way they avoided eye contact, the subtle cues that told her she wasn't welcome. She had seen enough. Quietly, she set down her fork and motioned for the check. When the server brought it to her, she paid without a word, leaving a generous tip despite the poor service. As she gathered her things, she caught the maitre d's eye and gave him a small, knowing smile. "Thank you," she said politely. "Have a good evening." As Maya walked out of the restaurant, she felt a sense of resolve settle over her. She hadn't revealed her identity, but she didn't need to. She had all the information she needed, and she knew exactly what she was going to do next. The next morning, the first light of dawn filtered through Maya's apartment windows as she sat at her desk, her laptop open and a steaming cup of coffee at her side. She had spent the evening reflecting on her experience at La Belle Maison, carefully noting every detail: the dismissive service, the subpar food, and most importantly, the attitude that had permeated the entire interaction. Maya's fingers hovered over the keyboard as she considered her approach. Her reviews were always thorough, fair, and honest. She knew the power her words carried. Her readers trusted her to provide an accurate depiction of their potential dining experiences. But this time, it wasn't just about the food, it was about something much bigger. She began to type, her words flowing steadily. La Belle Maison boasts an ambience of exclusivity and elegance, a reputation for culinary excellence crafted by the hands of Chef Pierre Lambert. But beneath the surface of its gleaming exterior lies a troubling truth, one that no Michelin star or glowing accolade can conceal. Maya recounted her visit in vivid detail, highlighting the contrast between the restaurant's luxurious presentation and the stark reality of her treatment. She described the subtle disdain she had encountered, the lack of care in the dishes served, and the sense of alienation that had colored the entire evening. As a food critic, I enter every establishment with an open mind and a willingness to appreciate the artistry behind the meal. But at La Belle Maison, the experience extended far beyond the plate. It was not simply the food that fell short. It was the fundamental respect owed to every diner who walks through the door. She paused, her gaze lingering on the screen. Her heart was heavy with the weight of her words, but she knew they needed to be said. Maya wasn't writing this review to tear the restaurant down. She was writing it to hold them accountable. 2 days later, the review was published. It quickly gained traction, spreading like wildfire across social media and industry circles. Readers were captivated by Maya's eloquence and the bravery with which she had addressed the underlying issues at La Belle Maison. The hashtag respect on the menu began trending as people shared their own experiences of bias and exclusion in fine dining. Back at the restaurant, Pierre's world was crumbling. He had been in the middle of preparing a lunch service when one of his sous chefs nervously approached him, phone in hand. "Chef, you need to see this," the sous chef said, his voice low. Pierre snatched the phone and scanned the article. His face darkened as he read Maya's review, his jaw tightening with every word. By the time he finished, his hands were trembling with rage. "This is slander," he bellowed, throwing the phone onto the counter. "Who does she think she is? Coming into my restaurant and writing this garbage?" The kitchen fell silent. The staff, though fearful of Pierre's wrath, couldn't deny the truth in Maya's words. They had seen how Pierre had treated her, the way he had dismissed her with a wave of his hand and ordered her food to be made without care. Some of them had felt ashamed, but none had dared to speak up. One brave line cook, a young woman named Danielle, finally broke the silence. "Chef, maybe this is a chance to reflect. She's not wrong about how she was treated." Pierre whirled around, his eyes blazing. "Are you taking her side?" Danielle held her ground, though her voice trembled slightly. "I'm saying we should think about why she felt the need to write this. If people are talking about respect and inclusion, maybe we need to look at ourselves." Pierre glared at her, but her words struck a chord. As much as he wanted to dismiss the review as baseless, he couldn't ignore the growing backlash. Reservations were being canceled, and the restaurant's social media pages were flooded with comments condemning his behavior. Meanwhile, Maya had moved on to her next assignment, but the response to her review continued to pour in. She received emails from readers thanking her for shedding light on an issue that often went unspoken. Some shared their own experiences of feeling unwelcome in certain spaces, while others applauded her courage for holding La Belle Maison accountable. One email, however, caught her attention. It was from Margaret, the restaurant's general manager. "Dear Ms. Brooks," the email began, "I am writing to sincerely apologize for your recent experience at La Belle Maison. Your review has prompted serious reflection among our team, and we are committed to addressing the issues you raised. Chef Lambert has been made aware of the gravity of his actions, and we are taking steps to ensure this does not happen again. We would greatly appreciate the opportunity to discuss this matter further and learn from your insights." Maya sat back in her chair, surprised. She hadn't expected such a response, but she appreciated the gesture. After a moment's thought, she replied, agreeing to meet with Margaret and the team. When Maya arrived at the restaurant for the meeting, the atmosphere was noticeably subdued. The once bustling dining room was nearly empty, a stark contrast to the vibrancy she had witnessed during her initial visit. Margaret greeted her warmly, ushering her into a private meeting room where Pierre and a few key staff members were waiting. Pierre looked visibly uncomfortable. Gone was the arrogant chef who had dismissed Maya so easily. In his place was a man who seemed burdened by the weight of his actions. He avoided eye contact as Maya took her seat, but Margaret quickly broke the silence. "Ms. Brooks, thank you for coming," Margaret said. "We wanted to personally apologize and share the steps we're taking to address the concerns you raised." Maya listened as Margaret outlined their plans. Mandatory sensitivity training for all staff, a new code of conduct emphasizing respect and inclusivity, and an open-door policy for employee concerns. As Margaret spoke, Maya could see the sincerity in her eyes, but she couldn't ignore Pierre's silence. Finally, she turned to him. "Chef Lambert, do you have anything to say?" Pierre hesitated, his hands clenching and unclenching on the table. He began, his voice faltering. He took a deep breath, his usual bravado replaced with a tone of vulnerability. "I was wrong. I let my ego get in the way, and I treated you unfairly. For that, I am deeply sorry." Maya studied him for a moment, searching for any hint of insincerity. She saw none. "Thank you," she said simply. "Apologies are a start, but actions speak louder than words." Pierre nodded, his expression earnest. "I know, and I intend to prove that I've learned from this." In the days that followed their meeting, Pierre was forced to confront the reality of his actions on a deeper level. The fallout from Maya's review had shaken him to his core, and though his initial reaction had been one of anger and denial, the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. The restaurant's reputation, once untouchable, had been irreparably tarnished, and the consequences were hitting every corner of his business. Reservations had plummeted. Longtime patrons who once praised his genius now distanced themselves, citing disappointment in the restaurant's treatment of its guests. Investors and suppliers were beginning to call, asking pointed questions about whether the restaurant would survive this storm. For the first time in years, Pierre felt powerless. A man who had built an empire, now watching it crumble before his eyes. The staff, too, seemed different. Where once they had followed his orders with a mix of fear and admiration, there was now an undeniable distance. He overheard whispered conversations in the kitchen, employees questioning whether they wanted to stay in such a toxic environment. Some had already handed in their resignations. Pierre spent long nights in his office, poring over the review, reading and rereading the words that had shaken him so deeply. He couldn't deny the truth in Maya's critique. The arrogance he had prided himself on, the exclusivity he thought gave his restaurant its allure, these had blinded him to the harm he had caused. But where did he go from here? One evening, as Pierre sat alone in the empty restaurant, Margaret entered quietly, carrying a folder of documents. She placed them on the table in front of him and took a seat across from him. "These are the final cancellations for the month," she said, her voice calm but firm. "If we don't do something drastic, we may not make it through the next quarter." Pierre rubbed his temples, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "I know," he muttered. "I just don't know how to fix this." Margaret studied him for a moment. "You start by doing the work," she said. "Real work, Pierre. Not just in the kitchen, but on yourself. You've built this place on your name, your talent, but also your ego. If you want to save it, you need to change." Her words stung, but they struck a chord. Pierre nodded slowly. "Where do I start?" Margaret opened the folder, pulling out a brochure for a diversity and inclusion training program. "We start here. Not just you, everyone, the entire staff. And then we rebuild from the ground up." Pierre stared at the brochure, his pride warring with his conscience. He knew this was necessary, but admitting it felt like surrendering a part of himself. Still, he nodded. "All right, let's do it." The training sessions began the following week. The entire staff, from the front-of-house team to the kitchen crew, gathered in the restaurant's private dining room, where a facilitator led discussions on bias, privilege, and the importance of inclusivity in the workplace. Pierre sat in the back of the room, uncharacteristically quiet, as the facilitator posed questions that made him deeply uncomfortable. "Think about the assumptions you make about people based on how they look, where they come from, or how they speak," the facilitator said. "How do those assumptions affect the way you treat them?" Pierre's mind flashed back to the moment he had dismissed Maya's presence in his restaurant. He had made a snap judgment, one rooted in prejudice, and it had cost him dearly. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. As the sessions continued, Pierre began to see his staff in a new light. He listened as they shared their own experiences, times when they had felt excluded or undervalued. For the first time, he saw the cracks in the environment he had created, the ways his behavior had trickled down to affect everyone around him. One afternoon, during a break in the training, Danielle approached him cautiously. "Chef," she said, her tone hesitant, "I just wanted to say, it means a lot that you're here, doing this. I know it's not easy." Pierre looked at her, the sincerity in her words catching him off guard. "Thank you, Danielle," he said quietly. "I'm trying. I know I have a long way to go." As the restaurant began its slow transformation, Pierre reached out to Maya. It wasn't easy. His pride still wrestled with the vulnerability required to admit his mistakes, but he knew it was the right thing to do. He sent her a letter, handwritten and carefully thought out. "Dear Ms. Brooks, I am writing to you with humility and a sincere desire to express my regret for the way you were treated at La Belle Maison. Your review opened my eyes to the harm I have caused, not just to you, but to others who have walked through my doors expecting respect and kindness. I let my arrogance cloud my judgment, and for that, I am deeply sorry. I want you to know that I am taking steps to change, not just for the sake of my restaurant, but for myself. I hope you will give me the opportunity to show you that I am committed to being better. If you are willing, I would be honored to welcome you back to La Belle Maison as my guest. With respect and gratitude, Pierre Lambert." Maya received the letter a few days later. As she read Pierre's words, she could sense the sincerity behind them. She had seen many public apologies in her line of work, most of them empty attempts at damage control, but this felt different. Still, she wasn't ready to give him an answer just yet. In the weeks that followed, Pierre threw himself into rebuilding not just the restaurant, but its culture. He held staff meetings where everyone was encouraged to share their ideas and concerns. He worked side by side with his team in the kitchen, showing them the respect he had once withheld. And he made a point to personally greet every diner who walked through the door, treating each one with the warmth and professionalism they deserved. Word of the changes at La Belle Maison began to spread. Slowly, patrons started to return, curious to see if the rumors were true. The restaurant's reputation, though still fragile, began to recover, and Pierre felt a glimmer of hope. One evening, as the dinner service was winding down, Pierre noticed a familiar face in the dining room. Maya was seated at a corner table, her expression calm but observant as she studied the menu. Pierre's heart raced. He hadn't expected her to take him up on his offer, but here she was. He took a deep breath and approached her table. "Ms. Brooks," he said, his voice steady but tinged with nerves. "Thank you for coming. It means more than you know." Maya looked up at him, her gaze unreadable. "Thank you for inviting me," she said. "I'm curious to see how things have changed." Pierre nodded. "I hope we can earn back your trust." As the evening unfolded, Pierre poured his heart into every dish that left the kitchen, ensuring that Maya's experience was nothing short of exceptional. When the final course was served, a delicate dessert that showcased his culinary artistry, Maya took a moment to savor each bite before setting down her fork. "This," she said, meeting Pierre's gaze, "is the meal I hoped for the first time I came here." "Thank you." Pierre felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "Thank you, Ms. Brooks, for everything." As the weeks passed after Maya's visit, Pierre's efforts to rebuild La Belle Maison extended beyond the walls of his restaurant. He realized that his change couldn't simply be confined to one establishment. It needed to be part of something larger. He began reaching out to other chefs and restaurateurs in the city, proposing a collaborative initiative to promote inclusivity and respect in fine dining. At first, some of his peers were skeptical. Pierre's reputation as an arrogant and difficult chef had preceded him for years, and not everyone believed his transformation was genuine. But Pierre persisted, attending industry events and personally meeting with other restaurant owners to share his vision. One such meeting was with Chef Clara Huang, the owner of a renowned Asian fusion restaurant. Clara was known for her progressive approach to the culinary world and her outspoken advocacy for diversity in the industry. "Pierre Lambert," Clara said with a raised eyebrow as she shook his hand. "I never thought I'd see you advocating for inclusion." Pierre winced but nodded. "I don't blame you for doubting me," he admitted. "I've made a lot of mistakes, and I know I have a long way to go. But I've seen firsthand how much harm this industry can do when it prioritizes ego over humanity. I want to be part of the solution." Clara studied him for a moment, then smiled. "All right, Pierre. Let's see what you've got." With Clara's support, Pierre began organizing a citywide event called the Table for All Initiative, a one-night event where participating restaurants would serve menus inspired by the theme of inclusivity. Proceeds from the event would go toward culinary scholarships for underrepresented groups, as well as programs to promote diversity in restaurant leadership. The idea quickly gained traction. Restaurants across the city signed on, eager to be part of the movement. Pierre threw himself into planning, using his connections and influence to secure sponsorships and media coverage. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose that extended beyond his own ambitions. Back at La Belle Maison, the atmosphere had transformed. The staff, once wary of Pierre's intentions, now worked together with a renewed sense of camaraderie. Danielle, the line cook who had dared to challenge Pierre, became one of his most trusted team members, often offering suggestions for how to improve the restaurant's operations. "Chef," Danielle said one afternoon as they prepped for dinner service, "I was thinking we could do a rotating menu that features dishes from different cultures. It could be a way to celebrate diversity and bring in new customers." Pierre considered her idea, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "That's a brilliant idea, Danielle. Let's make it happen." The first rotation featured dishes inspired by African and Caribbean cuisine, a nod to the rich culinary traditions that had often been overlooked in fine dining. Pierre worked closely with chefs from those communities to ensure authenticity and respect for the recipes, learning as much as he could along the way. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Patrons praised the bold flavors and the restaurant's commitment to celebrating cultural diversity. Pierre felt a sense of pride he hadn't experienced before. Not from accolades or awards, but from knowing he was contributing to something meaningful. As the date for the Table for All initiative approached, Maya received an invitation to attend the event as a guest of honor. The gesture surprised her, but she appreciated Pierre's willingness to acknowledge the role she had played in his journey. When the night of the event arrived, the city's culinary scene was abuzz with excitement. Restaurants were packed with diners eager to support the cause, and social media was flooded with photos and posts celebrating the initiative. La Belle Maison, in particular, drew a crowd, with patrons eager to see the restaurant's transformation firsthand. Maya arrived early, greeted warmly by Margaret and Pierre. The restaurant was bustling with energy, the staff moving seamlessly to ensure every guest felt welcomed and valued. As Maya was seated, she noticed the diversity among the diners and the staff, a stark contrast to her first visit. Pierre approached her table, his demeanor calm and humble. "Ms. Brooks," he said, "thank you for coming. It means the world to us." Maya smiled. "Thank you for inviting me. This is an incredible event." As the evening unfolded, Maya observed the changes at La Belle Maison with a critical yet open mind. The dishes were impeccable, each one a testament to the restaurant's renewed dedication to excellence. The staff, once stiff and unwelcoming, now moved with confidence and warmth, creating an atmosphere of genuine hospitality. When the final course was served, a rich and decadent chocolate tart with flavors inspired by West African cocoa traditions, Maya couldn't help but smile. It was clear that Pierre had poured his heart into every detail of the meal. As the night carried on, the atmosphere at La Belle Maison grew more vibrant, almost celebratory. Guests mingled between courses, discussing not just the exquisite food but also the larger message behind the evening. Maya, seated near the center of the room, watched with quiet satisfaction. The energy in the restaurant felt alive, full of purpose and connection. Pierre was making his rounds, stopping by tables to greet diners personally. It was a stark departure from the aloof, unapproachable persona he had once projected. When he reached Maya's table, he paused, his expression a mix of humility and gratitude. "Ms. Brooks," he began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion, "I wanted to thank you again, not just for being here tonight, but for everything. Your review forced me to take a hard look at myself and my restaurant. I'm not proud of how I treated you, but I'm grateful for the chance to make things right." Maya studied him for a moment, her gaze thoughtful. "Chef Lambert," she replied, "it takes courage to admit when you've been wrong, and it takes even more to change. What I've seen tonight is a testament to that change. But remember, this is just the beginning. The work doesn't end here." Pierre nodded, her words resonating deeply. "I understand, and I'm committed to continuing that work." As the evening progressed, Pierre took a moment to step outside and catch his breath. The night had been a resounding success so far, but he knew the journey wasn't over. The restaurant had come a long way, but there were still challenges ahead. He thought back to the days following Maya's review, the shame and anger he had felt, and the decision to confront his own biases head-on. It had been the hardest thing he'd ever done, but also the most rewarding. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps. Turning, he saw Danielle approaching, a bright smile on her face. "Chef, I just wanted to say, you did an amazing job tonight," she said. "I think everyone here can see how far we've come." Pierre smiled, the sincerity in her voice lifting his spirits. "Thank you, Danielle. Couldn't have done it without all of you. This team is what makes this place special." Danielle nodded. "Well, you've shown us that you're willing to listen and learn. That means a lot." Her words stayed with Pierre as they returned to the kitchen, where the staff was working seamlessly to prepare the final dishes of the night. He felt a newfound respect for his team, not just as professionals but as people with valuable perspectives and experiences. It was a lesson he wished he had learned sooner. Inside the restaurant, Maya continued to observe the flow of the evening. She was impressed by the precision and care in the service, but what stood out most was the genuine warmth that radiated from the staff. It was clear that the culture at La Belle Maison had undergone a profound shift, one that extended beyond surface-level changes. As dessert was served, Margaret approached Maya's table with a small envelope in hand. "Ms. Brooks," she said with a smile, "we wanted to thank you for being part of this journey. This evening wouldn't have been possible without your honesty and insight." Maya accepted the envelope, curious. Inside, she found a handwritten note from Pierre, along with a card announcing that a scholarship fund had been established in her name. The fund, supported by proceeds from the evening, would provide opportunities for aspiring chefs from underrepresented backgrounds to pursue their culinary dreams. Maya looked up, her expression one of surprise and gratitude. This is incredible," she said. "Thank you. It's the least we could do," Margaret replied. "Your review was a wake-up call for all of us. This scholarship is our way of turning that moment into something lasting." As the evening drew to a close, Pierre took to the stage to address the room. The guests fell silent as he stepped up to the microphone, his usual confidence tempered by humility. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "tonight has been more than just a celebration of food. It's been a celebration of growth, understanding, and the power of change. When we started planning this event, I wanted it to be a chance to give back to the community, but it's become so much more than that. It's become a reminder of why we do what we do, and who we do it for." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the room. "I want to thank everyone who has been part of this journey, especially Ms. Brooks. Your honesty and courage forced me to confront my own shortcomings, and for that, I will always be grateful." The room erupted into applause, and Maya felt a wave of emotion wash over her. It wasn't often that her work led to such tangible change, and seeing the impact firsthand was deeply rewarding. After the guests had left and the staff had finished cleaning up, Pierre gathered everyone in the kitchen. He looked around at the faces of his team, a mix of exhaustion and pride etched into their expressions. "Tonight was a success because of all of you," he said. "This restaurant isn't just about me. It's about us. Every dish, every interaction, every decision we make reflects who we are as a team. I'm proud of what we've accomplished, and I'm excited for what's ahead." The team erupted into cheers, their camaraderie stronger than ever. For the first time in years, Pierre felt truly connected to the people around him, not just as their leader but as their equal. In the weeks following the success of the Table for All initiative, Pierre found himself reflecting deeply on what the evening had meant, not just for the restaurant, but for himself as a person. The initiative had been more than an event. It was a symbol of what La Belle Maison had become, a space for connection, learning, and growth. Pierre threw himself into maintaining the momentum. The rotating menu featuring culturally diverse cuisines became a permanent fixture, and the restaurant began hosting special events that highlighted the stories behind each dish. Each week, a different member of the staff would share their personal or cultural connection to a recipe, adding a layer of depth to the dining experience that patrons adored. For Danielle, it was her grandmother's gumbo, a dish she had learned to perfect as a child growing up in Louisiana. For another sous chef, Luis, it was a paella inspired by his family's roots in Spain. Each story brought the team closer together, and Pierre found himself humbled by the richness of the lives and experiences that surrounded him. One afternoon, Pierre received an unexpected phone call. The caller introduced themselves as a representative from the Culinary Diversity Alliance, a national organization dedicated to promoting inclusivity in the culinary world. They had heard about La Belle Maison's transformation and wanted to feature the restaurant in an upcoming campaign celebrating industry leaders who were breaking down barriers. Pierre was stunned. A year ago, such recognition would have been a dream, but one born of his ego, a craving for praise and validation. Now it felt different. He was proud of the restaurant, but he was also acutely aware of how far they still had to go. "It would be an honor," Pierre said, "but I want to make sure this is about the whole team, not just me. They're the ones who make this place what it is." The representative agreed, and the campaign was set into motion. Over the next few weeks, a film crew visited the restaurant, capturing candid moments in the kitchen and interviewing staff about their experiences. Pierre stayed mostly in the background, ensuring the spotlight remained on the team. When the campaign launched, it was met with overwhelming support. The story of La Belle Maison's transformation resonated with people across the country, sparking conversations about the importance of inclusivity in all industries. The restaurant saw an influx of new patrons, many of whom shared how inspired they were by what they had seen and heard. Meanwhile, Maya continued her work as a food critic, but she couldn't help but keep tabs on La Belle Maison. She visited a few times anonymously, each experience reinforcing the changes she had witnessed during the Table for All initiative. The service was warm and attentive, the food consistently exceptional, and the atmosphere inviting. It was clear that the restaurant had truly embraced its new identity. One evening, as Maya was finishing a review at another restaurant, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was a press release from La Belle Maison, announcing a new scholarship program for aspiring chefs from marginalized backgrounds. The program, named after Maya, would provide full funding for culinary school, as well as mentorship opportunities at the restaurant. Maya's heart swelled with emotion as she read the release. She had always seen her work as a way to advocate for fairness and excellence in the industry, but seeing such a tangible impact was deeply gratifying. She decided it was time to reach out to Pierre, not as a critic, but as a collaborator. The next day, Maya called Pierre and proposed an idea. "Chef Lambert," she began, "I've been thinking about what La Belle Maison has accomplished over the past year. It's remarkable, but I believe we can take it even further." Pierre listened intently as Maya outlined her vision. A collaborative series of events that would bring together chefs, critics, and diners to explore the intersection of food and culture. Each event would focus on a different theme: history, identity, tradition, and feature discussions, cooking demonstrations, and, of course, incredible meals. "I love the idea," Pierre said, his voice filled with excitement. "Let's make it happen." The series, titled Stories on a Plate, quickly gained traction. The first event, held at La Belle Maison, sold out within hours. Maya and Pierre worked together to curate a lineup of chefs who represented a wide range of backgrounds and perspectives. Each chef shared the story behind their featured dish, weaving in personal anecdotes and historical context. The evening was a resounding success, filled with laughter, learning, and unforgettable flavors. Guests left feeling not just satisfied but inspired, their minds open to the ways food could serve as a bridge between cultures. Pierre and Maya's partnership continued to flourish, and Stories on a Plate became a recurring series, traveling to cities across the country. Each event brought new opportunities to connect with people from all walks of life, further solidifying La Belle Maison's reputation as a leader in the industry. For Pierre, the journey had been transformative. He had started as a chef consumed by ego and blinded by prejudice, but through humility, hard work, and the courage to confront his own flaws, he had become a champion for change. The restaurant, once a symbol of exclusivity, was now a beacon of inclusivity and excellence. One evening, after wrapping up another successful event, Pierre and Maya sat together at the bar, reflecting on how far they had come. Pierre said, swirling a glass of wine, "I used to think that success was about being the best, having the highest ratings, the most stars. But now I see that it's about something much deeper. It's about the people you touch, the lives you improve, and the legacy you leave behind." Maya smiled. "That's a lesson most people never learn. You've earned every bit of what you have now." Pierre raised his glass. "To growth, understanding, and the power of a good meal." Maya clinked her glass against his. "To stories on a plate, and the people brave enough to tell them." In the months following the launch of the Stories on a Plate series, Pierre found himself busier than ever. The events had taken on a life of their own, with chefs from around the world eager to participate and share their culinary heritage. Each event was unique, showcasing flavors, stories, and traditions that captivated audiences and left them hungry for more, not just for the food, but for the connections it fostered. Pierre was no longer just a chef. He had become a storyteller, an advocate, and a leader in a movement that was reshaping the culinary industry. But as much as he thrived in this new role, he never forgot where it all began, or the person who had set him on this path. One day, as Pierre was going through his calendar, an idea struck him. He picked up his phone and called Maya. "Maya," he began, his tone enthusiastic, "I've been thinking. We've done so much with stories on a plate, but I feel like there's one story we haven't told yet. Maya paused, intrigued. And which story is that? Ours, Pierre said. The story of how La Belle Maison changed. I think it's time we share it with our staff, our patrons, and the world. People see where we are now, but they don't know how we got here. I want to show them that transformation is possible. Maya considered his words, a smile spreading across her face. I think that's a wonderful idea. Let's make it happen. The project, titled A Taste of Change, became a labor of love for both Pierre and Maya. Together, they worked on a documentary that chronicled La Belle Maison's journey from an exclusive fine dining establishment to a beacon of inclusivity and innovation. The film featured interviews with staff, patrons, and community members, as well as candid footage of Pierre's growth as a leader. The process was both cathartic and challenging for Pierre. Revisiting his past behavior was difficult, but he knew it was necessary to tell the story honestly. He sat for hours with the film crew, recounting the events that had led to Maya's fateful visit and the reckoning that followed. There were moments, Pierre admitted during one interview, when I wanted to give up. Facing your own flaws isn't easy, especially when they've caused harm to others. But I realized that the only way to move forward was to confront those mistakes head-on and commit to being better. The staff also shared their experiences, from the tension of the early days to the camaraderie that had grown over time. Danielle, who had become one of the most respected voices in the kitchen, spoke about how the changes had impacted her. For the first time, I feel like I'm part of something bigger, she said. This isn't just a job anymore. It's a family. When the documentary was finished, Pierre and Maya decided to host a premiere event at La Belle Maison. They invited not only industry professionals and patrons, but also the community members who had supported them throughout their journey. The night of the premiere, the restaurant was filled with anticipation. Guests gathered in the dining room, which had been transformed into a screening space. As the lights dimmed and the opening scenes played on the screen, Pierre felt a mix of pride and nervousness. This was his story, the good, the bad, and the transformative, and he was laying it bare for all to see. The film was met with laughter, tears, and applause as it unfolded, each chapter resonating with the audience in different ways. By the time the credits rolled, the room was filled with a palpable sense of hope and inspiration. When the lights came back on, Pierre stepped up to the front of the room, Maya by his side. He looked out at the crowd, his heart full as he prepared to speak. "Thank you," he began, his voice steady. "Thank you for being here tonight, for supporting us, and for believing in the power of change. This journey has taught me more than I ever thought possible. Not just about food, but about people, about humility, and about the responsibility we have to each other." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "This restaurant is no longer just a place to eat. It's a place where stories are told, where connections are made, and where every person is valued. That's a legacy I'm proud to be part of." The audience erupted into applause, and Pierre felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He turned to Maya, who smiled and gave him a nod of approval. "You've done something incredible, Pierre," she said softly. "And this is just the beginning." Following the premiere, the documentary was released online and quickly went viral. It sparked conversations not just in the culinary world but across industries, inspiring leaders to reflect on their own practices and consider how they could foster inclusivity and growth. La Belle Maison became a destination not just for its food, but for its story. Diners came from near and far, drawn by the restaurant's reputation for excellence and its commitment to making every guest feel welcome. Pierre, once consumed by his ego, now found joy in listening to his patrons' stories, learning from their experiences, and sharing his own. One day, as Pierre was tidying up after lunch service, he received a handwritten note from a young aspiring chef who had watched the documentary. The note read, "Dear Chef Lambert, I just wanted to thank you for sharing your story. As a Black culinary student, I've always felt like there wasn't a place for me in fine dining. But seeing what you've done with La Belle Maison gives me hope. It reminds me that there's room for all of us at the table. Sincerely, Jordan." Pierre read the note twice, his throat tightening with emotion. He placed it carefully on his desk, a reminder of why he had chosen this path. Later that evening, as he stood in the kitchen watching his team work together seamlessly, Pierre felt a deep sense of gratitude. The road to change had been long and challenging, but it had also been worth every step. Turning to Danielle, he smiled. "Let's make tonight unforgettable." She grinned back. "Every night is, chef." And as the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses filled the restaurant, Pierre knew they were building something that would last. A legacy of respect, inclusion, and the universal power of a good meal. As the months unfolded, the impact of La Belle Maison's transformation rippled far beyond its walls. The documentary, A Taste of Change, continued to garner attention, sparking discussions in industries where inclusivity had often been sidelined. Culinary schools incorporated it into their curriculum, using it as a case study on leadership, humility, and the power of evolving perspectives. Pierre's journey had become an example of how one individual's willingness to change could set off a cascade of positive shifts. At the restaurant, Pierre's leadership continued to grow in unexpected ways. The rotating cultural menu, which had started as an experiment, had evolved into a permanent fixture. It wasn't just about celebrating flavors. It was about honoring the stories and histories behind them. Each month, a different culture or region took center stage, and Pierre worked closely with chefs and culinary historians to ensure authenticity and respect. One month, the focus was on Ethiopian cuisine, a decision inspired by one of the kitchen staff, Alam, whose family had immigrated from Addis Ababa. Alam had hesitated to suggest the idea, fearing it might not be taken seriously, but Pierre's enthusiastic response put him at ease. "This is exactly what we need," Pierre had said, his eyes lighting up. "Food is storytelling, and your story deserves to be heard." Alam's excitement was infectious. He worked with Pierre to develop a menu that highlighted traditional dishes like injera, doro wat, and kitfo. Alam's mother even visited the restaurant to share her family recipes and provide insights into the cultural significance of each dish. On the first night of the Ethiopian menu's debut, Alam stood by Pierre's side in the kitchen, nerves and pride battling within him. As the dishes began to leave the pass, the positive reactions from diners filtered back to the kitchen, filling Alam with a sense of accomplishment he had never felt before. By the end of the evening, Alam approached Pierre, his voice tinged with emotion. "Chef, thank you for giving me this opportunity. It means everything to me." Pierre smiled, clapping Alam on the shoulder. "You earned this, Alam, and you've reminded me why we do what we do." As La Belle Maison continued to thrive, Pierre's efforts extended into the broader community. He began hosting cooking classes for underprivileged youth, partnering with local organizations to provide free culinary education. The classes weren't just about teaching skills. They were about fostering confidence and creativity in young people who might otherwise feel overlooked. One of Pierre's most dedicated students was a 16-year-old girl named Amara. She had grown up in a neighborhood where opportunities were scarce, but her passion for cooking had always been a source of hope. When she joined the program, Pierre immediately noticed her talent and determination. "Amara," he said one afternoon as they worked on perfecting a sauce, "you have something special. I see it in the way you approach food with care and curiosity. Don't ever lose that." Amara beamed, Pierre's words igniting a spark within her. Over time, she flourished in the program, eventually earning a scholarship to attend culinary school, a scholarship funded by the initiative launched in Maya's name. Meanwhile, Maya had been busy expanding her own influence in the industry. Inspired by her experience with Pierre and La Belle Maison, she had started a podcast called At the Table, where she interviewed chefs, restaurateurs, and industry leaders about their journeys and the role of food in creating connections. The podcast quickly gained a following, with listeners drawn to Maya's thoughtful questions and the candid stories her guests shared. One day, Maya invited Pierre to be a guest on the podcast. He hesitated at first, unsure if he was ready to revisit the past so publicly, but Maya assured him that it was an opportunity to inspire others. During the recording, Maya asked Pierre about the moment he realized he needed to change. Pierre's voice softened as he recounted the day of her visit to the restaurant, the discomfort he had felt reading her review, and the journey of reflection and growth that followed. "It wasn't easy," Pierre admitted. There were moments when I wanted to defend myself, to find excuses. But the truth was staring me in the face. I had been wrong. And if I wanted to be the kind of chef, the kind of person who makes a positive impact, I had to face that truth and do better. Maya nodded, her respect for Pierre evident. And you've done that. The changes at La Belle Maison speak for themselves. But what I admire most is your commitment to ensuring those changes are lasting. Pierre smiled. That's the goal. It's not about one moment or one event. It's about building something sustainable. As the podcast episode aired and gained traction, Pierre found himself reflecting on how much his life had changed. The man who had once been consumed by arrogance and prejudice had become someone he barely recognized, and he was proud of that. One evening, after a long day at the restaurant, Pierre sat down with Margaret to review the next quarter's plans. As they went over upcoming events, Margaret looked up from her notes, her expression thoughtful. "Pierre," she said, "have you ever considered writing a book? Your story could reach even more people, and it could be a way to document everything we've learned along the way." Pierre blinked, surprised. The idea hadn't crossed his mind, but as he thought about it, he realized it made sense. A book could be a way to share not just his personal journey, but also the stories of the people who had inspired him, the staff, the patrons, and the communities they had connected with. "I like that idea," Pierre said. "Let's make it happen." The book, titled At the Table of Change, became a bestseller within weeks of its release. It was part memoir, part guidebook, offering readers a glimpse into Pierre's transformation and practical advice on fostering inclusivity in their own lives and businesses. The book's success brought new opportunities, including speaking engagements and collaborations with organizations dedicated to social impact. Through it all, Pierre remained grounded, never losing sight of the lessons he had learned. He continued to lead La Belle Maison with humility and heart, ensuring that the restaurant stayed true to its mission of celebrating diversity and creating connections. One evening, as Pierre locked up the restaurant after another successful service, he took a moment to reflect on the journey that had brought him here. The path hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every challenge, every uncomfortable moment of growth. Turning off the lights, Pierre stepped out into the crisp night air, a sense of peace washing over him. He knew there was still work to be done, but for the first time in his life, he felt truly fulfilled, not by accolades or recognition, but by the knowledge that he was making a difference. And as he walked home under the stars, Pierre thought about the stories yet to be told, the lives yet to be touched, and the meals yet to be shared. It wasn't just about food anymore. It was about building a legacy, one plate, one connection, one change at a time. The weeks rolled into months, and Pierre's life continued to evolve. La Belle Maison, once a bastion of exclusivity, had become a symbol of change and growth, drawing patrons from all over the world. But it wasn't just the restaurant that had transformed. Pierre himself had become a man he never thought he could be. The arrogance and narrow-mindedness that had once defined him were replaced by humility, empathy, and a deep appreciation for the power of connection. One evening, as Pierre reviewed the latest financial reports in his office, Danielle knocked lightly on the door. She entered with a smile, carrying a folder in her hands. "Chef, I thought you'd want to see this," she said, placing the folder on his desk. Pierre opened it to find letters from patrons and participants in their outreach programs. Each letter shared a story of how La Belle Maison, or one of its initiatives, had impacted their lives. One letter stood out in particular, a note from Jordan, the young aspiring chef who had written to Pierre months earlier. "Dear Chef Lambert, I wanted to thank you again for inspiring me to pursue my dream. The scholarship you helped create has changed my life. I'm halfway through culinary school now, and every day I feel more confident that this is where I'm meant to be. Someday, I hope to open a restaurant where everyone feels welcome, just like La Belle Maison. Thank you for showing me what's possible. Gratefully, Jordan." Pierre read the letter twice, his heart swelling with pride and emotion. He set it down carefully and looked up at Danielle. "These letters remind me why we do this," he said. "It's not just about food. It's about the people we touch along the way." Danielle nodded, her own expression full of emotion. "You've built something incredible here, Chef. and you've inspired all of us to be better. As La Belle Maison continued to thrive, Pierre found himself reflecting on the road ahead. He knew that the work of creating a more inclusive world was never truly finished, but he was committed to doing his part. Inspired by the letters and the success of their initiatives, he decided to take things a step further. He reached out to Maya, who had been busy with her podcast and various speaking engagements, and proposed a bold new idea. "Maya," he said during one of their calls, "I think it's time to take our mission global. Let's create a foundation that supports inclusivity in the culinary industry on a larger scale. Scholarships, training programs, mentorships, we can do it all." Maya was quiet for a moment, processing his words. Then, with a smile in her voice, she replied, "Pierre, I think that's the best idea you've ever had. Let's do it." The foundation, named the Table for All Foundation, launched 6 months later with an ambitious vision: to create a culinary world where diversity was celebrated and everyone had a seat at the table. The foundation quickly gained support from chefs, restaurateurs, and organizations around the globe, becoming a driving force for change. Through the foundation, Pierre and Maya organized workshops, conferences, and community outreach programs. They worked with schools to introduce culinary arts to underprivileged students, partnered with restaurants to provide job opportunities, and hosted events that highlighted the cultural significance of food. The impact was profound. Young chefs from diverse backgrounds found their footing in an industry that had often overlooked them, and established chefs began to embrace the principles of inclusivity and respect that Pierre had championed. 1 year after the foundation's launch, Pierre stood on the stage of a packed auditorium, addressing an audience of industry leaders and aspiring chefs at their annual summit. Maya stood nearby, ready to moderate a panel discussion after his speech. "As chefs, we have the privilege of bringing people together," Pierre said, his voice resonating with conviction. "Food is universal. It transcends language, culture, and borders. But with that privilege comes responsibility. It's up to us to create spaces where everyone feels welcome, valued, and seen. That's the legacy I want to leave behind." The audience erupted into applause, a standing ovation that lasted for several minutes. Pierre stepped back, his heart full as he watched the crowd. This wasn't just about him, it was about a movement, a collective effort to make the world better, one plate at a time. Later that evening, Pierre and Maya sat together, reflecting on everything they had accomplished. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" Pierre asked, his tone contemplative. "All the time," Maya replied. "And every time, I'm amazed. This started with one review, one moment of accountability. And look at what it's become." Pierre smiled, his gaze distant. "It's funny. I used to think success was about stars and accolades. Now I know it's about something much deeper, about the connections we make and the impact we leave behind." Maya raised her glass in a toast. To connections, impact, and the power of change. Pierre clinked his glass against hers. To stories on a plate. As the evening wore on, the two friends sat in companionable silence, knowing that their journey was far from over. But for now, they could rest, proud of what they had built and hopeful for what was still to come. The transformation of La Belle Maison, and of Pierre himself, was not just a story of redemption. It was a testament to the power of humility, perseverance, and the courage to change. And as the legacy of their work continued to unfold, it served as a reminder to the world that no matter how difficult the journey, change was always possible.